Great. Order of business. I am really excited that we are going to kick our meeting off here today with a celebration of excellence. So Tanya, I'll kick it over to you so you can do the introductions.
Absolutely. Oh yeah, order of business. I have one order of business I wanted to change on the agenda.
Oh, sure.
Can we back up and do that first?
Of course.
Okay. Under action, wondering if we could move number 2 to the end, because we are hopefully going to have the city here to talk about the easement. But he had a conflict at 7, was going to try to be here at close to 8, so wondering if we could make that
Great.
change.
Any concerns with moving that? Great. We will then move number 2 will become number 6.
Thank you.
Great. Any other order of business that we want to address before we move on? Excellent. And then keep me honest when it comes to that time because, all right, now, celebration of excellence.
Yes, absolutely. So last
the board
month, we started moving from just a recognition of me reading about people doing amazing things to asking people, staff and students to come in and talk about things that they've done. So we're really excited to have our first student staff team come forward. So tonight we're lucky to have Jack Jackson, who is our student and family engagement specialist at the high school, and Akina Sabakfi as a student in the graduating class of 2025. And they are here with us tonight, and they are going to talk about the first annual Culture Fair recognition that they did last spring. I'm going to turn it over to the two of you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having us. I'll get started. Again, Jack Jackson. I was greeted by a group of students at the high school about this time last year about an idea to celebrate culture at Monona Grove High School. And I said, why not? Why can't we take this and make it as big as we can? And throughout, some planning, students realized that this was a bigger task than they first initially had thought, right? There's a lot of planning that goes into it. They wanted to initially do like a lot of dances and celebration and food and invite local restaurants to come in. But again, students tend to get a little bit busy throughout the year with homework and sports and jobs and other responsibilities. So throughout the next few months, we kind of scaled it down and said, you know what, we're still going to do this to celebrate all the culture at Monona Grove High School, but we want to make it a little bit different. So as you can see in the pictures, we just had different booths set up by a number of students representing their cultures. We had cultures from all over the world. Some families brought in dishes to share. Some families brought in artifacts and certain items that they have. And then some students were even there just to talk about their culture and pass out food that they made. So it was a great event. It went over very well, and we're looking to continue that this school year. So, yes. And Akino, of course, was one of those students who initially approached me with that idea. So she was definitely my right-hand person with that throughout the whole year planning the event.
What questions does anyone have or other thoughts?
How many different booths were there? I don't need an exact number, but kind of ish. How many?
I think I'd say close to around maybe like 10 to like 12. Yeah, because we did have it be a little bit smaller than we expected because we were shooting for such like great goals. But yeah, it was a very good, solid like 10 to 12 booths that were just in the commons of the high school.
Yeah. And this year we are looking to kind of continue to shoot high where we want to maybe have some different celebrations of dance or poetry or different fashion and clothing articles from different cultures that are represented. And whether it's in the auditorium or in the gymnasium, kind of do something like that where we still have food and different booths set up in the commons, but also a little bit of a organized event that way where, again, there's dances and things of that sort. So we're hoping to do that.
Other questions?
Yeah. Did the families participate in addition to providing food and?
Yes, actually, we did receive a nice donation from Forever Friends, a group out of Cottage Grove that was able to help fund a lot of this. They paid for a lot of the decorations, some of the food for the students. I wanted to help out with that because if they're going to be making food, I thought, well, we should be able to help with that. So we used some of the money that was donated from them to help out with that.
And the families attended though, like parents?
Yes, they did. They attended and it seemed like everybody had a great time. So at least what they said, I'm assuming they did. So.
Yeah, Rochelle.
Was this during the school day? Were the students in the high school were also part of it, or was it an evening event?
It did start, I think, about 4 o'clock, so about a half hour after school, and it ran to about 6 or 6:30. A lot of students that were there for clubs or sports did attend, and some just hung around to attend just because they were curious and wanted to learn more about different cultures. But yeah, some families came back, so it was early evening. I'm sorry, some students came back, so early evening where, again, some people hung around, some people came back, so, yeah.
Yeah.
When you say we, was this, does this fall under a certain club at the high school, or is it just like, just a few students and you?
I like to say we because I never want to take credit for something that a group of students do, right? It's we, it's all of us. We all have our part. The students that were more involved in this were members of our Monona Grove Coalition, which is a group of student leaders that we have at our high school. That is a newly formed group. We have a lot of different campaigns that I can talk about, but the student group that did come up with this idea and pretty much, pushed it through the school year was part of the Monona Grove Coalition. So.
Great. Yes, Tanya.
So Akina, what is your plan moving forward for 2025?
As in for Culture Day or just like the plans in
Yes.
general? For Culture Day, for me personally, as much as I really love this, the one that we put together in this last year, I think for this year, I'm shooting for the similar goals as Jack is explaining with having more cultural dances and just being able to bring more students together for a bigger variety of cultures than we had the last year. As much as I love and appreciate everybody who wanted to participate, and something I've been dreaming of our school doing since my own freshman year, and here I am 3 years later, finally bringing it to life. I think this last year for me, one of my biggest goals is just to make it bigger, to be able to collab with the community and businesses in order to like have food from different cultures and have different dances to be able to perform, so people know that Monona Grove, our district, is a very diverse place and we are all welcome.
Great goals. As you're planning, please keep us posted of when the date is so we can make sure to get that out and hopefully attend. And if there's anything we can do to support your work. Thank you.
Any other questions or feedback?
No, just thank you for doing this work.
Yeah, what an amazing thing to have put together, and I'm really excited to see where it goes next year, for this year.
Yes, we're excited.
Yeah. Well, thank you for coming today
coming
and
in.
sharing the excellent work that you're doing.
Our second area of celebration of
Already
excellence.
jumping in.
I know, already jumping in, is we want to introduce our student representative on the board. And we're excited to have Lena Gath Gerber.
It's
right?
Rathgaber.
Rathgaber, yeah, that too. Yeah, we even talked about this. Yes. And so she is our new student representative. She is a junior at Monona Grove High School, and she'll be joining us for our regular board meetings. And when we read a little bit about her student life, the fact that she is here is kind of amazing. So she's on the tennis team. She's also involved in the drama program. Some of you may recognize her as Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz in the Spring. She also is a member of DECA, and she is the VP of Communications this year for that group, and did attend the national conference competition in California, and also a Model UN student. And the main reason of becoming a student representative was really wanting to improve her leadership skills. So we're really excited for watching you grow over the course of the year. And we have been trying to get together to talk about different things that she can bring to the board to report about what's happening, and some insight into the life of a student in Monona Grove. So we're super excited to do that. So since tonight's her first meeting, she's just gonna be observing and obviously jumping in as she feels comfortable. So we're really excited to have you here, and welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Lena. We're so glad to have you here. I feel like the board is a richer experience when we have a student representative. We're really excited to hear kind of what you have to bring in terms of being able to share student perspective, but also I think the insights that students have asking questions on our discussion items and our action items have been invaluable for the board. So really looking forward to working with you this year. Glad you asked a question already.
Right.
And feel free to ask questions as we move along our agenda today too.
Thanks.
Anyone else have anything to say to Lena before we move on? All right. Next up is public appearances. We have one speaker today, Lydia Bertram. Hello, Lydia. Welcome back.
Lydia Bertram, Cottage Grove. Hi again, everyone. I'm up here today to say thank you to everyone who's seated at a table. I've been to every recent school board meeting, the annual meeting, met with the superintendent and assistant superintendent, and even attended yesterday's virtual policy meeting. It is clear from everything I've seen that you are listening to us, the community, and are working to improve our district for the long term. From the superintendent proposing policy suggestions that check her own power and make more work for her and her staff, to board members choosing to forego their stipend, to the policy changes you are voting on tonight that bring community members and staff to the financial table and put into motion an avenue for budget communication with the public. I see you. I see everything you are doing to fill the gaps that led to this crisis. And I thank you for your time and your energies that are being put forth to right this ship. Members of the board, you undeniably have made some mistakes. But right now, in the midst of this crisis, your actions have been commendable. And I thank you for your continued service to our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Lydia. I appreciate that. All right, next item on the agenda is the consent agenda. Can I get a motion, please?
I'd move approval of consent agenda as presented.
I'll second that.
Voice vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Ayes have it. Motion carries. All right, next up, I'm a little biased here, but my favorite action item today, G1, which is the ad hoc 4K2 Attendance Boundaries Committee recommendation to the Monona Grove School District Board of Education. So I would love for the committee members to come a little closer. Do we need another chair or two? It's like a BYOC situation. Just roll it up. All right, we've got a good representation of the committee here, but a reminder to folks on the board as well as folks in the audience and watching at home. We had lengthy discussion last year about moving to a community schools model in Cottage Grove. So having both Taylor Prairie and Cottage Grove School transition to 4K2 schools. As you'll remember, the board approved the creation of an ad hoc committee to talk about what the boundaries should be for those new schools so that we can work towards implementation for the next school year. I was on the committee as chair. Peter Sobel was our other board representative, and we had a number of other folks, which will get introduced here soon. But I just want to say I cannot thank the work of this committee enough. We had some amazing discussions. Sometimes they were difficult. There was some tussle back and forth, which I think is important when we're talking about what's going to be best for kids moving forward. And I just want to thank all of you for taking time out of your busy schedule to hang with us, to look through all the data, to have the hard conversations, and to come to a conclusion and recommendation that I really think is going to be best for the students in our Cottage Grove area. So with that, I think, Laura, you are kicking us off, right?
Yes, I have the hardest
Yes.
job of all. So first of all, good evening, everyone. Thank you for having us here today to talk about the school boundary recommendations. So I have the pleasure of introducing this team, which was composed of different members, ranging from staff, community, and also the school board, and all provided different perspective into the conversation. Like Elizabeth mentioned, there were some very tough discussions, but we all put our hats thinking about, what's the goal from this ad hoc meeting or committee, and keeping in mind the best interest of the community and of our kids. And I have the privilege of being part of that committee from the community perspective, and also coming from an underrepresented background, so I'm very privileged to be part of that. And I also would like to welcome the committee to introduce themselves. And we'll start with you.
Tracy Philippi, community member, mother of 3 in Cottage Grove.
Hi, Emily Foster, principal at Taylor Prairie and community member of Cottage Grove.
Jesse Starr, I'm the principal at Cottage Grove School.
Lisa Sutter, and I am a staff member in the district, but I'm also a community member and parent of kids in Cottage. Okay, so I'm going to just remind you of our charge. So the ad hoc Boundaries Committee was charged by you, the Board of Education, to make an advisory recommendation to the school board for the creation of attendance boundaries for Taylor Prairie School and Cottage Grove School to be implemented for the 2025-2026 school year. The committee will submit a written report to the board. This report will include a summary of the committee's research, conclusions, and recommendations related to school attendance areas presented for consideration by the board. The committee will be available for, well, we're here tonight to answer.
There it is.
And I'm going to turn it over to our administrators.
And board members, you have the report as well as summary detailing the work of the committee up until now, as well as a link to previous board agendas that we used to discuss if you need more context and background.
So we are launching right into the committee recommendation, and you'll get to hear more details about the why from some other team members in a bit. But basically, in front of you, you can see the map of Cottage Grove. The outline in blue is our school district boundary. This map includes both the village and the town of Cottage Grove. You can see some of our main roads there. There's Highway BB, which runs east-west. It's also called Cottage Grove Road. And then there, it's got the blue dots. Another road with blue dotted lines is Highway N, and that's Main Street in Cottage Grove. So based on an extensive review of the current enrollment data and student demographics, we spent a lot of time talking about demographics and spent a lot of time hearing about projected enrollment. We got to have a visitor come and speak to us about the projections, and you'll hear about this in a bit. But based on all of that, the committee recommends a boundary that extends east-west along that main Highway BB and north-south along Highway N. So residents north and west of Highways BB and N would belong to the Taylor Prairie attendance zone, and that is in blue, or maybe a little bit purplish.
Periwinkle. It's a light periwinkle.
Residents east and south of that intersection would belong to Cottage Grove School attendance zone, and that's in green. We talked a lot about natural boundaries. We talked about how these are sort of our main arteries in Cottage Grove. We're not diving into neighborhoods and side streets, so we see these as sort of our natural boundaries in Cottage Grove. All right, I'll talk about one aim of the recommendation, and then Jesse's going to take the others. But one aim is to optimize educational resources. So some of the resources that we talked about were staffing, and we feel that staffing would be pretty similar between the two buildings based on demographics, based on enrollment. So that includes like special ed staffing, EL staffing, related arts, and of course, those can be adjusted as needs come up, as they always are. But looking at projected enrollments and demographics, it seems that they would be fairly similar. Approximately 4 homeroom teachers per grade level in each building, which means that grade level collaboration would continue to happen. But the bonus is that teachers would be able to collaborate cross grade level and get that benefit of vertical alignment. And then another resource we know is busing, and just it appears that we may have shorter bus routes, and that just makes everybody happier. So those are a few of the resources that we talked about.
Yeah, and certainly we wanted to honor the district's goals of equity and diversity, and certainly we want to live our mission statement to be a safe, equitable, and inclusive learning community for everyone. So as we had these discussions, I think equity was one that really came about, that we weren't necessarily always talking about equal, but having that equity lens when making these decisions and considering these boundary lines, and just knowing we would have an equity focus on the impact of the boundaries as they were written. We also wanted the aim of this recommendation to accommodate for future growth. You'll hear more about that with the Vanderwall study that's part of this, but we were considering our current enrollment, but we also wanted to consider the future growth for Cottage Grove. This dual focus ensures that we remain agile. The recommendations and decisions should aim to be scalable and flexible. And then to cultivate a cohesive and supportive educational community. when we started this process, like if you look at the map, we have some nice clean lines in the community. We didn't know what it was going to look like. We didn't know if we would have a boundary line running right through the community and neighbors across the street would be split in different schools. And that was a big part of it. We wanted to think about keeping our communities together, and certainly it would be a goal of both Emily and I to continue that focus, even for those students who might not be at the same school, but really, supporting an educational community and the families living within that, in those zones.
You want to talk data, or you want me to talk data?
Well, I would preface the talk about data by saying this, which is, it looks like we just drew a line on BV and a line on N and said, we're done, and we could have done that in 5 minutes. It turns out, nobody was expecting that to happen. And we spent a lot of time looking at demographics, and it turns out that that is just about right. It's not perfect, but it's just about right to do that. And I do want to say we spent a lot of time looking at the data to come up with what looks like a really simple solution, because we do want to get it right. And I preface this back to when I lived in California. I lived in a school district where they had district boundaries, something we haven't had in this district before. And one day they moved the boundary a couple of blocks and my property value went up 25%. So it's very important. The impacts on the community can be pretty big if you don't have this just right. So we did spend a lot of time on this. We came up with, I think, it's fortunate we can come up with a simple solution. There are concerns, and we did spend a lot of time, and I spent a lot of time trying to poke holes in this because it just didn't seem right. It seemed too easy. I wanted to make sure we had it right.
So my fellow board members won't be surprised, right, about Peter trying to poke holes in the data that we looked at, which is appropriate, right? That's the point. That's the point of it, right? That was why we did it. And so there was 4 main demographic categories that we looked at, in addition to kind of growth trajectory, right? So it's a combination of you can imagine like an intersection, right? So like demographic information over kind of current spread in the community, and then potential growth based on the development that we know. So we obviously looked at race, ethnicity. We looked at students who are English language learners. We looked at free and reduced lunch eligibility, which we often use as a proxy for lower income families, as well as disability status. And as Peter said, we looked at this information a lot in lots of different ways. We looked at the boundaries in lots of different ways, even thinking about okay, well, if this isn't exactly kind of equal here, what if we moved this part over here, this part over here? And I think the community did a really great job of, and Jesse spoke at really well, there's equal and then there's equitable, right? And this idea that maybe we could get the numbers to match up more perfectly if we annexed a street or annexed a thing, but then you're watching kids drive by Taylor Prairie on their way to Cottage Grove or vice versa, right? Or we're thinking about, well, if you're on this side of the street versus this side of the street, and at a certain point, you lose community cohesion, you lose the richness that is to develop a community, which is an equity issue in and of itself. And so, like Peter said, it looks like a really simple solution. Like we all sat down and went, awesome. But yeah, if you would have asked me at the beginning of this, if that would have been the case, I would have said absolutely not. There's no way that that's going to work. And as it turns out, it did. So I'm very pleased with the work that we did. I'm very happy to share all of the information that we looked at too, if you're interested in kind of taking a look at it with more details.
And on this page, we've got, the projected enrollment, the enrollment in those two, if we had those districts 23, 24, and then what it'll look like in 10 years. And there's not much change, which is a good thing from this point of view. It means we can, if this holds true, we can roll this forward for 10 years. We don't have to worry about boundary changes in most likely. Something, by the way, that the board should notice that really disturbs me is that the numbers show almost no growth in 10 years, which is a problem for the district.
From a financial perspective.
From a financial perspective, under the current funding formulas to the district. So that is a concern, but in terms of what the point of this study is to do these boundaries, it looks like this will be something we don't have to consider again in a few years.
And Vanderwall did come in and present to the committee with a very complex, multi-layered map that showed all of these different pieces, as well as the developments that are in place, and then the style of development too, because there's like single-use homes, there's multi-family homes, those kinds of things. Yes, Janice? Oh,
Van Wall's the consulting
Consulting.
firms at this time, does
yeah.
population
That-
studies.
Yeah, that did our population study. Thank you, Janice. Great.
You've
I
got
got
a
a
question.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry, Eric, I didn't see.
Is, for Peter, Elizabeth, is Vanderwall, I was going to ask what you used to project the enrollment growth. Did you take the information that they provided to do that? Is that how we got to 247
Yeah.
and 236?
Yes.
When they did the study, did you look at the study? Like, what were they using to get those projections?
Current population, they have a model that's based on the development plan and the permits or the processes that the.
And vacant land too?
And
or
the
like-
vacant land
okay.
and all that. And they have a model that says, this kind of home is going to get this kind of
Yeah.
population, and we anticipate certain probability that this will happen at these rates. My experience with population studies is they're good for a few years. There's this number 10 years out. We really don't know what that will look like. If it's good, and sometimes it is, then you have this number. But it's good for several years, but beyond that, it gets really hard to beat.
Right, sure.
Yeah, so one question I have is, looking at the map, is it correct to assume that the population attending Cottage Grove School will be more predominantly bused than the population attending Taylor Prairie? Would that be an accurate assumption?
Geographical.
Yeah.
Like if you combine the populations and you say there's this many kids getting bused, this many not, is a greater percentage of that or a significantly greter percentage attending one school versus
Yeah, I
the
would
other?
say that Taylor Prairie unit is a tighter unit overall. And how we have previously assessed like our walk zones, for example, and depending on how far those go out, I'm not sure what a significant difference that will make. But certainly in Cottage Grove, particularly like when you think about where I live, right, out in the out in the town, like those kids will absolutely have to get bused. There's just like no safe route to get to school regardless of
Right.
whether you're going to Taylor Prairie or Cottage Grove School.
So what I'm curious about was there any discussion or, about that change in the character of the two schools relative to each other at all, where the experience at one is different from the other because, such a large population is getting bused, whereas the other is closer? I don't know what that would be. I'm just curious if that was something that was considered, how a snow day might affect one or the other or things like that.
Yeah, it's a great question. We talked about transportation in terms of efficiencies, but not in terms of like equity, I think is what you're referencing, right? Like if
Just experience. Yeah,
right, yeah.
just,
So if more kids are getting bused versus not.
does start times have to be different or,
Yeah, I don't anticipate any challenges there. I will be curious when we take a look at transportation maps, though, kind of what, I think we should circle back on that question. I think it's a really interesting one, and one that Emily, you probably wouldn't even be able to project right now because the walk zone for Taylor Prairie is so tight because of the age of the youth. And our first and second grader walk zone is also pretty tight. So I'd be curious to see kind of what that ends up looking like. Yeah, Tanya.
Yeah, so we have started conversation with Nelson's Bus Company to look at what will the impact of this be and what would those efficiencies look like? Because right now, there's those staggers because people have to, open house night. I followed the same families from one building to the other because they're trying to get there too. And so that's been some of the concerns also. And so really thinking about what that needs to look like and are there some efficiencies? We'd really love to get to the point where we could, if we could think about start times, could we bus more students that are included as opposed to the buy a seat program? Is there a different way to do that? And so wanting to relook at that will be part of what we'll need to bring back into the boardroom.
It's a great question, though. So that's,
I do believe that one of the impacts there will be on net more walking.
yeah.
Because you'll be more years in the school that's closer to you, yeah.
I mean, that's what I would predict too, but kind of given rethinking by a bus seat, I'll be curious to see how it shakes down. So I think we should let's keep that in mind as we keep thinking about transportation, which we're going to have to as the year goes on anyway. I think it's a really important question. Thank you, Philip. Yeah, Susan.
I know that the committee studied this in great depth, and I just didn't see any comments, and I know this is one of the questions that the community has right now, so I just thought if you could take a minute and speak to the point of costs.
Yeah, so the committee didn't talk about cost because that's not part of their charge, right? That was part of why we moved to have an ad hoc committee in the first place. But for those of you who weren't around for those initial discussions, we talked a lot as a board around the relative expense of this. And what we concluded at the time is, generally speaking, the cost should be somewhat minimal, and that the benefit of moving into this community schools model outweighs kind of the cost that we'd have. There's a couple of things around, like some playground pieces, some supply pieces, library came up quite a bit. That was pre us knowing about our current financial situation. So actually at our last ad hoc meeting, which was a couple of weeks ago, we brought that question up again to Tanya, and not to put words in your mouth, Tanya, but you sort of confirmed.
So I think as we've talked with leadership from those schools, when you're thinking about 4K, 5Ks in one building and 1-2s in the other building, what the biggest lift will be is we need to take some of that little tiny furniture and put it over here, and we need to take some of the bigger furniture and bring it over here. So that will be minimal. Thinking about how do we use our custodial staff and buildings and grounds to make that flip. So that's manpower and time, but not a huge expense. I think the bigger expense and that we are thinking about is how do we make sure that the playground at Cottage Grove School is accessible for the littles. And so we've been working with facilities and then also working with the Cottage Grove Schools Family Organization to think about what would a fundraising event look like to really think about how do we do that. And it might have, playgrounds are expensive, so it might have to happen in a couple phases. But that's probably the one major expense that we need to think through.
The board made the decision last fall, I think, to go to this model. And at that time, we evaluated the costs and weighed them against what we thought were the educational gains and the issue of not having this additional transition. And we thought that was a very favorable exchange. And that's when we discussed the issue of cost. And this committee was then to take that and turn that into boundaries.
But it's a relevant question in our current context, for sure. Any other questions? Yeah, Philip.
During the introduction, I think it was mentioned that, that this process wasn't just super easy and you didn't just get to this in a straight line, that there were challenges. I'm curious if there's anything that the committee feels is noteworthy or interesting to share, right, that you addressed throughout your process, right, that you got stuck on or, had a moment of reflection about. I'm wondering if there's anything you think is worth giving us some more insight into along the way of how you got from A to Z.
Yeah, I would say, I think we started with that view of equality, of really trying to create two equal schools and trying to go against, the idea of one school being better than the other, and really had a lens of let's try to get two equal schools. And we had to remind ourselves what equity is, and remind that we're able to use our resources and shift those as needed, while still honoring equity within our communities. And so I think that was a lift that we all kind of went through together and had some rich discussions around. I think one thing I'd mention, Philip, I appreciate your student experience question too. Sometimes we had to remind ourselves is that this is just up until second grade, and then everything else stays the same. So sometimes we get ahead of ourselves in looking at these lines, and this is unique. This is just up until second grade, and then they're going to have the same experience that they already have. And so, the bussers from Monona going out to Cottage Grove, and the bussers from Cottage Grove going out to Monona, that's still going to live, and we're still going to have those same student experiences. But sometimes I think we would get a bigger view of it, and then have to remember we're talking about our littles up until second grade, and then nothing else is changing from them for that student experience, and they all are coming together at those stages.
I appreciate that, Jesse, and we did have a number of times, I think, where it's are we letting perfection be the enemy of the good here, right? At a certain point, you could spend all day tinkering, moving, trying to find pieces, and really giving ourselves permission as a group, from my perspective, to say, this is the best decision we have, and we're going to implement it. We're going to see how it goes, and we have the always have the opportunity to go, hey, this is what's best for kids. Let's keep going. Or something happened here that's not what's best for kids, and we can make adjustments there. So we did have a lot of those moments of just like, are we spinning in places where maybe it ceases to be useful, right, as opposed to forward moving.
Thank you.
And I would just comment that we probably want to reach out to the village and the town and see if they want to hear from us on this issue, give them an opportunity if they want us to come in and talk about it.
Yeah.
We should reach out to them, let them know that that's an option.
But and I was going to kind of ask a question on that. You guys living in the community and taking your kids to school or being in the school, so you were talking to people. What's the temperature of the community that you've engaged with and their thoughts that they've shared or concerns?
Oh, no, that's okay. I didn't see you walk in. You can pull up, yeah.
And so just from a child care situation, oh my God, rush from one to the other, there were many parents who were feeling like, this is so hard. You know, I can use my own self and also friends that we have. So hard. Well, I'm going to Taylor Perry and then Cottage Grove School and then Greenwich, and the children are waiting, and it's just it feels so rushed, yet we have to be so careful because there's children leaving the school and there's long lines of cars, and so it's, you know, not just myself, but I talked to many other parents, and they felt the same way, that at the end of the day, from a parent perspective, it will be nice not to be having to run here, there, and everywhere, and your kids are just kind of in one spot. And another bonus is that your kids are in one spot. You know, the older sibling and the younger sibling, they see each other there, which right now they don't. And then more feedback I got was, that's one less transition. You know, for example, my daughter is now in Cottage Grove School, which is awesome, and she's so happy to be there. And she was so sad to leave Principal Foster. And so it was like a change, and now that she thinks she's going back, she's like so excited because she'll be with her little brother. So it's, you know, they're both wonderful places. And at the end of the day, from so many perspectives, it's a nice change. So I haven't personally heard any other parents or community members who are upset about the change. I think there was a lot of concern about how does it get divided and how do we make that parent go. Just as comments, it was very hard to think of, okay, how do we not get stuck thinking about what's best for the group of kids versus what's best for a few kids versus what's best for families. And so there is no perfect answer, but I think we all sort of came around this idea that this is good.
I echo Andrea's comments. The same experience, at least like talking to different members of the community and expressing the same kind of like needs in terms of transportation and picking up kids, et cetera. Like personally, I think it's great that my kid now had the opportunity to go to Cottage Grove, and then probably next year we'll go back to Taylor Prairie. And she's like very adaptable, and I think at that age they tend to be more adaptable than we are at an older age. I think like for kids with special needs, it may be like challenging, especially with change. But again, like I think that we're giving enough time for making these changes and like processing all this information.
Yeah, Susan.
Well, I appreciate that, those comments. And again, I think Elizabeth and other board members have not given themselves as much credit for the research that was done as this started to be initiated, and I had seen it as well, but the research, not as strong in the younger students, but particularly the middle school students, that transitioning from one building to another, even if it's the same students, may have a documented effect on student achievement. And that research was very compelling in working on this review. And again, Elizabeth, for one, had done great research on that. And I came in with all that. She said, I've already seen that. it's because we were looking for rationale to understand what are the right things to do for these students. And that, what's interesting is to speak to that very point as you talk about moving the students between the buildings. Thank you.
Any other questions from the board before I pass it over to Tanya and Jesse, I think, and Emily to kind of conclude for next step in the event that the board approves this tonight?
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously, I jumped in at the last minute, but I think can echo everyone's sentiments that was very glad that the board had already made a decision to move to this model, because I do think research is real strong on the number of transitions, and I think it's hard, it can be hard on kids, it's hard on teachers, hard on families. As I said, the feedback that I got through all the open house nights were families really looking forward to moving into next year, where they know as they enter the system, they'll be going, that they'll be there through second grade, and just having those 4 years of consistency. And it was pretty cute. At the night I read at Cottage Grove School, there was a family that came with their littles, and they were like, this is going to be their school, because they were 3-year-olds, so they knew for next. So it was cute. So I think there was a lot of positive vibes. I think the only questions I've had is, does this have a budget impact that will make it, that will stall it? And so I think that question really wasn't about not doing it, but the question was, are we sure we're going to be able to do this? So I think that that's positive. So really wanting to move forward with the recommendation, really making sure, as we know, when you've got schools that are serving same ages, of really making sure that everybody's got high quality materials, and from an equity lens of really thinking about, that really is about everybody having what they need, and making sure that, you know, as a system, we can meet those needs based on the kids that show up and walk through the doors. So very much appreciate the work of the committee and their recommendations, and just look forward to moving forward with this.
May I have a motion, please?
Are we looking to approve this tonight? Is that?
Yep, it's in
I
action.
I would move, yeah, there's no recommended action.
Below it,
Oh, below it? Okay.
Yeah.
Where is that?
So it's right above the graphic, right there.
Okay. I would move approval of the ad hoc for K-2 attendance boundary committee recommendations of the Monona Grove School Board District Board of Education beginning in the 25-26 school year.
I will second that.
Other discussion?
Just thank you. Thank you for putting in all the time and work. It's appreciated.
Yeah, I can't emphasize enough how grateful I am. And to me, this is like good, meaningful school board work that feels really good to do. And I'm glad that I was able to do it together with all of you. So thank you again. And thanks to Peter for your contributions.
Particularly because it's difficult to have some of these conversations about equity and fairness and so on. It can be hard for all of us to step into this. So I appreciate everybody who helped with this.
Great, let's do a roll call vote for this one. Susan? Janice?
Aye.
Eric?
Aye.
Philip?
Aye.
Rochelle?
Aye.
Peter? Elizabeth, aye. Ayes have it, motion carries. Thank you. All right, so skipping 2 per our order of business earlier. What?
Oh, he is here.
No,
Are we moving Jake back up?
That is your decision. That he probably
we
would
might
love
as well.
that.
I am comfortable, if the board is comfortable moving up Jake so he doesn't have to stay until the end of our action items, then we can reverse the previous reversal of order of business. All right, so number 2 for real, the multi-use path easement between Monona Grove School District and the city of Monona. And Tanya, are you going to introduce this topic?
Yeah, absolutely. So the city of Monona and the Winnequa School share some abutting properties where there's walking paths that move between the 2 different spaces. And so those are safe walking paths, highly used. They're used by students. They're also used by community members. And so the city was approached the district to ask about some easements, changes that we could make that would allow them to do some upgrades to those pathways and making sure that they are safe and usable, and increase that, as you can see, the route around there with the dark. So that would require some easement requirements of some land that we own as a school district for them to be able to have access to, in exchange for them making the improvements, and then obviously removing the snow and all of those really amazing facilities things that needs to keep happening. So we do have Jake here tonight to answer any questions about this and to talk about the project as you may have them.
Good evening, everyone. Jake Anderson, Park and Rec Director, City of Monona. Year 17 for me, Monona resident, district parent, have got to see firsthand how well, at a staff level, the city and the school work together. Winnequa Park is a beautiful spot that serves our residents and our district students at Winnequa. The path that was currently connecting Greenway Road to the community center, neither the district or the city has any record of who put it in and what arrangement there's been. But for the past 20 years, at least, the city has been maintaining the path, clearing snow in the wintertime, mowing up to that path. And we did some easement work or locates for potential future city campus building and saw where the actual boundaries are. So if you've seen the properties, it just blends from the school into the park. Part of the path project itself is providing safe walks to school, getting our kids off of the streets onto paths, and actually moving the path mostly onto city property to allow for snow removal from the parking lot. So kind of what happens historically is we try to snow remove for the path to get the kids to school, and the contractors or district personnel will be plowing the parking lot, and then we kind of just get snow on top of another. So the positive for the district and personnel is that we'll now have some snow area for removing the snow on the parking lot. The city will be able to remove snow from the path and expand the walk radius of kids to Winnequa School. Just along with this, we are, if you can see it on the very top, we're extending the sidewalk from the end of Greenway Road to connect into, there's an existing sidewalk that kind of abuts out on Rothman. So the typical pickup aisle is for vehicles to drive down Rothman, turn left, and then a quick right into the Winnequa School parking lot. So for kids traveling via bike or walk from that area, this now gives them a complete way to come into the park from Fireman's Park, which would be the Winnequa Road, Tony Awath exit, take a 10-foot wide accessible path all the way sidewalk into the school. So this has been a project that we've been working on for several years. It also improves some of our ADA transition goals for providing accessibility for our activities that we offer in the park. So you'll see kind of the field layout there. So we'll now be able to have the ability for mobility challenged individuals to watch our spectator activities. The easement itself was drafted by our city attorney, legal counsel, and shared with the school district legal counsel as well.
Questions for Jake? Yes, Philip, or sorry, Peter.
I'm just looking over, for the most part, I mean, all of this stuff, most of the stuff is just taking place on the city park, in the park property. The difference that concerns us here is that stretch along there where you're moving you're straightening that path, moving it towards the softball fields, and you're actually increasing the distance between that path. You're straightening it out, increasing the distance between that path and our current surface lot, correct?
Correct.
That's why we're here talking about it, because of that move, right?
Well, because there's a portion of the path that's still on district property. So like the pins are like, if you know where the shelter is, it's like 10 feet, 15 feet off of that. In all reality, it looks like you're going from the school parking lot into the park. Mm-hmm. And so, have two property pins. And so we've tried to straighten out the path or get it as further away from the school, property lines as much as we can. There was a lot of emphasis on staying away from the two large cottonwood trees that are there at the corner that provide shade for both the park and the district. I think one's
There's not that many years left in those two trees.
Depends on who you ask.
Yes, sir. Okay, thank you.
Other questions?
Just for the district, for Tanya, any concerns with the easement, with any aspect of this?
No, we met with the city, we had it looked at. We felt like it was a win-win on both sides, safe access for kids, but then also just a really good community process for them to be able to move safely about the community from an accessibility standpoint and just, working together.
Okay, great.
And currently, there's no agreement that anyone can find between the city and the school district for the existing.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that again?
Did I read that right? We can't find any previous agreement regarding this?
Correct. Went through the archives, and I believe it was early 90s that path was probably put in, like the original pool was built in 63, rebuilt in 93, the shelter was built in 88, so probably somewhere in that range, 88 to 93 was when the original path was put in.
I move approval of the multi-use path easement between Monona Grove School District and the city of Monona as presented.
I'll second that.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed? Ayes have it, motion carries. Thank you, Jake. All right, next up is the resolution awarding the sale of a $7 million taxable general obligation promissory note. You're sitting at the front table today.
I don't know where should I sit?
You're fine, you're fine there, that's okay.
We have actually,
One,
we have 3 resolutions before you tonight. The first is the $7 million operational loan that we have discussed in the past, and the 2 others are parameter resolutions for cash flow borrowing. We have Kevin Mullen here from Baird. Who'd like to, come on up to walk through all 3 of these.
Yes. Thank you. It's very nice to see you all again tonight. So I'd like to just discuss these resolutions separately. The first resolution, the title is a resolution awarding the sale of $7 million taxable general obligation promissory notes. So this is the loan that we had discussed the last time I was here at the board meeting. It is the long-term loan, a Fund 38 loan, which means it will be repaid within your revenue limit. This loan is going to be used for the purpose of paying operational expenses and basically, in essence, repaying your fund balance. We reached out to roughly 9 lenders to have them look at this loan and provide us with bids back. We had 3 bids that we received back, and I'd like to just turn to this report here to summarize the results of that process. So the 3 lenders that responded back provided interest rates that ranged from 4.88% to 6.05%. Those rates include the fixed cost of the financing, including the variable costs that each lender might have had for legal expenses on their side. So we wanted to include those costs to reflect, the true expense of all 3. The lowest bidder was Webster Bank at 4.88%. And, all of the terms of these loans were slightly different. We talked with them and kind of worked with them to make the terms agreeable to your needs. We feel, that their loan is going to satisfy your needs as well as represents that low interest rate that we were hoping to get, lower interest rate than the other 2, but also you may recall the last time I was here, we were discussing this in relationship to the state trust fund for a taxable borrowing, and that loan rate would have been roughly 5.5%. So we're happy that this ended up lower than that as well. Turning the page, just to give you a brief description of what that loan looks like, it's $7 million of proceeds. The settlement date is October 2nd, which means that we will have that available in early October. That'll come into play in a minute when we talk about the other 2 loans. Maturities, we have the first interest payment in May 1st of 2025, but the first principal payment comes due May 1st of 2026 through 2034. And again, I mentioned the all-inclusive cost is 4.88%, and the purchaser is Webster Bank. The last page just shows what those annual payments look like under those terms at 4.88%. So there'll be an interest payment in the current year of $367.98, and then moving forward, principal and interest of roughly $956,000. So I just want to briefly turn to that resolution. The first part of the resolution states what it's being used for, and it's being used for the current and general expenses of the district. So generally, any questions? Oh, one other thing I did want to point out are the redemption provisions. So Section 3, the repayment provisions, this loan is payable in full beginning May 1st in 2029. You have the ability to prepay up to $250,000 a year prior to that period of time. We'd hoped to have it fully callable, but felt that this, met your needs as well as accommodated some of the requirements and restrictions that they had. So, the trade-off was the lower interest rate for this call provision.
Questions from the board?
That was going to be my question, was hoping for an explanation on that Section 3, the prepayment, which you just provided. So if I could just say it back to you to make sure I understand and the board understands. So we can't prepay this loan in full, is what I'm hearing.
You can repay this loan in full beginning May 1 of 2029. Prior to that date, you can pay it partially in up to $250,000 each year up to that point in time.
2029 would be the first time we could pay the whole thing off.
Correct. The one other stipulation is that they either you pay it all off or up to $250,000. So they were a little inflexible in terms of that prepayment.
Yeah, Eric.
So, I mean, are you saying that we could pay it off in 2030 though as well, right?
Correct.
Okay, any time after that May 1st, 2029 date, but not before it.
You can before you can partially up to $250,000.
Just up to the $250,000.
Correct,
okay.
which is a little bit unusual.
I have just a quick question just on that, just to confirm. So the other two bid results that we've got from Zion's and from Johnson Financial Group, did they have like a more complete callback?
Their calls, redemption provisions were, at any point in time.
Okay.
So more flexible, but.
But this is the recommendation because the total cost will be lower because.
Total costs will be lower, and the reality is that you're probably going to want this flexibility at least for a period of time until, kind of have better direction.
The probability we'll be able to call it back in the next couple of years feels low, and if we can save money in the process while we're rebuilding, that makes sense to me.
Correct.
And then just to confirm, it's $250,000 annually up until
2029,
Yep.
correct.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
Yes.
And correct me if I'm wrong, I'm sorry, but correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, we always do cash flow borrowing every year. And if the cost to us of this, prepaying it, would actually just be the difference in the interest here versus the cash flow borrowing. Because if we prepaid $250,000, we would end up doing cash flow borrowing of $250,000 to compensate.
Yeah, short answer, yes. Long answer is right now, we probably aren't in a position to do that.
No,
So
but
the likelihood of doing that is, pretty. Yep.
Correct, but if we were going to prepay it in the future, it would be at the expense of additional cash flow borrowing in that amount.
Absolutely.
So we would only save the difference in the interest rate. So it wouldn't be it's probably not very likely that we'll be in a position or even desirable to.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I think that's a good analogy, yeah.
Can I?
Other question,
Go ahead, Eric. No.
Go ahead, Eric.
I guess my question is for Kristen or Tanya, the $956,000 looking forward, that yearly excess amount, I'm assuming there's going to be a plan where we're going to take that into account so that we can pay this?
Yeah, so the October budget will have this $360,000 payment because that is in the spring of this year. And then when we do our 5-year financial projection, we'll include the $1 million payment within that projection. So it'll have to be planned for.
Philip, did you still have a question?
Yeah, just one more point of clarity on the 250. If we were to, in one of the years prior to 2029, pay the 250,000, does that then change the interest schedule at all? It does. Like similar to a mortgage, are we saving future interest?
Correct, and I think they actually said if you were to pay it in part, that it would come off the later maturities.
Okay.
So it's a flat interest rate, so there's really no benefit to doing anything but that. There really wouldn't be a lot of other reason to do that than just pay it off the backside.
Other questions? Yes.
Approval of the resolution awarding the sale of $7 million in taxable general obligation promissory notes as presented.
I'll second that.
Okay, any further discussion? All right, let's do a roll call vote for these series. Peter?
Aye.
Rochelle?
Aye.
Philip?
Aye.
Eric?
Aye.
Janice?
Aye.
Susan? Elizabeth, aye. Ayes have it, motion carries. All right, next up is the resolution authorizing an issuance and establishing parameters for a temporary borrowing in the amount not to exceed $7,600,000 pursuant to section 67.12, paren A, paren 8, paren A, 1. I think that's the end of it. It has a comma instead of a period.
Great. And actually, I'm going to refer to both parameters resolutions kind of together in terms of the explanation for them. So what the parameters resolution is it's a resolution that provides authority to issue both of these temporary cash flow notes. And it details the parameters for that issuance. So maximum interest rate, what the purpose is for, the maximum maturity, and the maximum amount. The reason that we're considering a parameters resolution, step back a minute, that parameters resolution then gives authority to Kristen to sign and complete the authority to issue those notes, as long as the loan fits within those parameters. The reason that we're considering this is for flexibility and for timing. If we didn't do this, we would need to have a special meeting between now and the beginning of October to approve these notes, and we feel, really confident that we understand that the loan is going to be inside these parameters. So it's really an accommodation to make sure that we can get the funds in place by the beginning of October without a lot of disruption. So the first one is for the tax and revenue anticipation note, which is the traditional TRAN that you use for cash flow purposes. So that loan is issued or authorized not to exceed $7.6 million. The interest rate is not to exceed 6%, and the maturity is not to exceed November 1st of 2025. And it's for the purpose of maintaining and meeting the immediate expense and operating needs of the public instruction for the district for the current school year. The pledge is the budget that you'll be approving. The timing is such that the loan that was previously approved in the last motion will close October 2nd. Prior to that, you'll have paid off last year's tax and revenue anticipation notes. The $7 million that you're receiving for the long-term borrowing gives you the ability to pay that off and start operating. But we also have last year's line of credit of $5 million that needs to be paid off before you can close on this loan. So we'll be using some of that $7 million to pay off temporarily or in the moment that line of credit. This new $7.6 million will then give you the ability to start paying expenses while you're waiting for state aid and tax receipts in October. So the timing is really important to get right.
Questions?
I would just note that this is what we do every year, the cash flow borrowing that we do every year because our expenses don't match the timing of the state payments to the district. This is business as usual.
Yes, Phil.
Are these amounts the same as previous years? So the 7.6 million and the 5 million, so 12.6 million, is that?
Same as similar to last year. I don't think that you had the line of credit prior to last year, the $5 million additional. And I think, the tax and revenue anticipation note may have been growing over the past couple of years.
The total in our fund balance determines these amounts.
Right. So as the fund balance
the more we
shrunk,
outflow, yeah.
right.
Absolutely true.
So as the fund balance regains its health, potentially that 5 million line of credit, the necessity of that diminishes.
Yeah. And actually, I think, if we're talking about the 5 million line of credit, which is the next parameters resolution, really that's there mostly for comfort heading into December. just because it's hard for us to know exactly where cash flow is going to be, not having a real strong understanding of exactly when all those receipts and expenses are going to go out. So we just wanted it to be there for comfort. If it's drawn on, my expectation is it would be drawn on for a very, very short period of time, like days, 15 to 30 days, and repaid as soon as you get your first tax receipts in January.
Yeah, go ahead. Phil.
Follow up on the draw for the 5 million. So we don't know if we would need to use it, but we think there's a pretty good chance. If we needed to draw on that, does that come back to the board? Or once we approve the 5 million, it's out there to be used?
So that's a really good question. At this point, I don't think that there's a requirement that that comes back to the board, but I do think that as a board, you would want to know if you're going to be drawing on that. So, you could just state that, if that draw occurs, you'd like that to be reported to the board.
Yeah, I think any of this that, gets used, I think there should be visibility into that, and we should talk about it just as it all happens. Yeah.
Well, we will do the 7.6. We do that.
Yeah, no, I understand.
Have to.
No, I understand the 7. I'm talking more specifically about the 5 million.
I mean, and if we're lucky, we don't need to do 5 if the timing's not right.
And I will say one comment on the 7.6, and I do want to just briefly address the 5 million line of credit in a moment. But the $7.6 million, that is a not to exceed amount. The reason that, we dialed in on that, we think your cash flow needs are more like 8 for the year on a tax, and we would have liked to have done a full tax exempt issue for that. But given some of the earlier designations that had been made on your tax exempt borrowing for some capital projects that were issued for 2.4, the maximum we could issue as bank qualified is 7.6.
Right.
There also is a lease that has, a designation as tax exempt in the current year that may have to count a little bit against that. So it's possible that that loan is, somewhere between 7 and 7.2 for the tax exempt piece, which again is we've got the comfort of the 5 million if we need that temporarily.
Yeah, Eric.
Well, Kristen, I'm wondering if you could just give a brief reminder, not only to the board, for myself, but to the community, how the funding formula works in Wisconsin, because why we need to borrow first, why we just don't have that money right away, because that has to do with the state funding formula, the budget, and the counts, correct?
It actually has to do with the property tax and state aid, the timing of which we get those payments. Our fiscal year starts July 1st. We really don't see, some aid payments until October-ish, but it's not a large amount. Our biggest property tax payment is in January. So we're operating for 6 months and haven't even received, anything in terms of property taxes for that fiscal year. So it really has to do with timing of when we receive those receipts. And it's not unusual for a lot of districts to have to cash flow borrow because of that situation.
You could say it's not really possible to run a district without cash flow borrowing.
Big fund balance.
Right, yeah, you'd have to have a big fund balance, and then, there's some downsides to that. Why are you holding on to cash? You're not using it. So there's, pros and cons. It's really about philosophy of boards and what they want to do. Do they, want to avoid any interest costs at all, at all costs? Or, do they understand that it's, just a timing perspective and it's the cost of doing business and we really want to utilize the funds we have to do the work we need?
I thank you. I appreciate that. And I don't think that, I certainly don't want to overlook that. And I think in the past that may have been, something that we made an assumption that people know. So I think it's important to clarify that for everybody.
A long time ago, I point out when we had a 25% fund balance, we still did cash flow borrowing. You would need 35% to avoid it.
Other questions? A question for you, Kristen, specifically as you're building out, obviously, goal to do this, build out the budget for this school year, and then kind of turn into next school year. I'm curious, based on what you know at the moment, do you anticipate next year's budgeting cycle and next year's borrowing cycle to be more typical?
don't know if I can answer that at this point in time. You know, we'll do that 5-year forecast to see, you know, it's going to depend on the first, how is this year going to look? Are we going to be able to get close to balanced? And then, you know, building out that 5-year forecast to try to have a plan to, you know, where are we going to get to where we want to be? I think it'll be better than it is now, but I can't, too conservative to say,
That's
yeah, it's
fair.
going to all be fine.
Yeah, no, and that's fair, and I appreciate that. But I do think that, you know, kind of as we get through this into October and as we move out, I think the sooner that we can know whether or not to expect kind of typical borrowing that the board has operated on previously versus kind of anomalous borrowing, which is kind of where we're at right now, right? The sooner we can know that, the better, so that we can look out for things.
Well, I think as we move forward, we talked about, you know, the Finance and Operations Committee on a monthly basis, reviewing revenues, expenditures, cash flow, balance sheet. I think that, you know, that information, the board will be able to see the trajectory of our cash and where we are.
We should be able to see whether or not we're drawing down on the 5 million there too, right?
Right.
Great. Excellent, thank you. Other questions? Otherwise, I would love a motion if someone was so
I would
inclined.
move approval of the resolution authorizing the issuance and establishing parameters for temporary borrowing in an amount not to exceed $7.6 million pursuant to sections 67.12, paragraph 8A1, Wisconsin statutes as presented.
I'll second that.
Okay, roll call, or any further discussion? All right, roll call vote. Susan? Janice?
Aye.
Eric?
Aye.
Philip?
Aye.
Rochelle?
Aye.
Peter?
Aye.
Elizabeth? Aye. Ayes have it, motion carries. All right, next item was an item that we were sort of had rolled into and started conflating into number 4 here, but resolution authorizing the issuance and establishing parameters for a taxable tax and revenue application promissory note for cash flow purposes in the amount not to exceed $5 million pursuant to section 67.12, paren 8, paren A1, Wisconsin statutes.
As presented.
Yes. Well, thank you. Again, so similarly, this is that one of those additional cash flow tools. This is a line of credit which is available to be drawn on throughout the school year up until the end of June, but does not need to be paid back until November as well. The not to or the interest rate here is defined as a variable rate. It's 0.5% off the current prime rate as listed in the Wall Street Journal. So 0.5% lower than the prime rate as stated in the Wall Street Journal at the time that it's drawn, not to exceed 8.5%. So it's got a cap on it, but you know, based on when you draw it, that would be the interest rate. And maturing on November 1st. One thing I didn't mention about the previous loan and this loan as well, they're both being placed with Lake Ridge Bank, a local community bank here in town. And so I think that's important to note for the last resolution as well as this resolution.
Questions? Yes, Peter.
I was going to have a question. You already read it, so I'm just
Oh, I
going to
did.
say so moved.
Can I get a second, please? Any further discussion? All right, roll call vote. Peter?
Aye.
Rochelle?
Aye.
Philip?
Aye.
Eric?
Aye.
Janice?
Aye.
Susan? Elizabeth? Aye. Ayes have it, motion carried. Yeah, that's why you had me put the as presented on there, huh?
Right, exactly.
Thank you.
Thank you so much
Thank you.
for all your work. We appreciate it. Thank you, Kristen. All right, last item on the agenda for action is policy revision PO 0155, committees.
Yes, so when we were here, was it recently?
Thursday?
Thursday. We talked about creating a standing committee that would include a finance and operation, in addition to adding community members and staff to teaching and learning, equity, and the Finance and Operation Committee. And so we're very grateful to Susan and Rochelle and to Janice for quickly pulling together to come up with a draft that we talked through and have for consideration for tonight. And so if you attached in board docs is a draft of that.
Again, what But just so the committee is aware of how this moves forward, basically what happened at the September 5th board meeting was that a motion was approved by the board to establish the Finance and Operations Committee, at which time that has to come to the policy committee to add that language, and then it comes back to the board to be approved. And the superintendent, in her goodness, and getting this together and understanding the push to do this, was able to call and get the committee together. We met at 8 o'clock in the morning on Tuesday and stayed until the draft work was done. The superintendent actually brings the draft language to us that they're suggesting for the committee. And then the committee reviews it and looks at maybe other samples and other things as they work through the material. In this particular case, we did find that Middleton does a similar thing, and we reviewed the Middleton work, looked at what they had as their draft, and then looked at their minutes from their meetings and how they actually work within their meeting schedule. So I just wanted to make sure that you all understood that, again, it's kind of a funny process, but it goes to policy, but the superintendent basically directs and moves it and brings the draft, which we then reviewed.
Questions at all about what's in front of us?
In case people are wondering, we should establish, it adds policy that mentions the Finance and Operations Committee, which is chaired by the treasurer and includes 2 community members. It also adds policy. We had this for ad hoc, but for standing committees, it adds a process for which we can add community members. There's also a discussion, it also says staff members for those committees who can serve in advisory roles.
And I also just want to comment, what's a little bit different about this committee is it directly, as Peter said, the treasurer would be the chairperson, and then the assistant superintendent of business and operations is directed to be the district person, which obviously makes sense. So the 2 of them work closely together, working through the charges as are laid out for number 1 through 8 about what is really actually the work of that committee to be doing and keeping track of.
Yes, Phil.
Well, one question I have is in the, I guess this really would apply to both the TLE and the F&O committees in terms of community involvement. I note that the way the policy is currently written, the chair of each committee has the sole responsibility of interviewing candidates and making a selection and recommending that selection to the board. I'm wondering if we want to consider, more involvement in that process. Curious to hear what other board members think, but I'm wondering if we want to have
Or board involvement?
or the committee, right? Other people from the committee involved in those interviews or.
I would comment that that's a minimum, and that if the interview process, and the way we've done it in the past with the ad hoc committees, we've had a few people sitting in on
Okay.
those
Yeah.
interviews, and I would certainly anticipate that.
Okay.
Yeah, Susan.
So one of the things that I think is just if you start at the very beginning and you talk about, so the first thing we basically did is we added finance and operations as a standing committee. So that was very clear and that was easy to do, and Tanya brought that draft in for us. Then the next things that you look at when you look at the other committees and the kind of language they're looking for is we're looking at the composition and then the things that you want them to do. So again, the composition that we were recommending seemed to be from based on a consensus of the board, and that is basically following standard practice of 3 board members, and then looking at the suggestion of 2 community board members and 1 basically staff member. And then including, and this was really well done, again, by the superintendent, making sure that the language included the assistant superintendent as a part of that committee. So again, if you start with the thought of the composition. Now, what's interesting about that is that, and you may want to add clarity to that, the actual motion to form the committee specifically said, that was approved by the board, to move approval of the committee with members appointed by the board president. So if you actually look at the policy, if you have a staff member under the current policy, it basically says appointment of district staff to advise or serve of a committee are appointed by the superintendent, and it states that they serve ex officio. So I want to make sure that as you look at this formation, you're not surprised. So, and yet the language of the motion was.
And I don't want to talk about the motion from the last meeting because what we're trying to talk, so that was.
That drives it though.
Well, that was so that we could start moving forward on F&O committee. So the purpose of our discussion right now is what is in the policy versus what's not in the policy.
So what's currently in the policy is that the superintendent would do.
Right, yep.
However, you made a board motion, which may supersede the policy because it's different. So it leaves us in some contention. So I was trying to see that the board.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Our policy is what is going to rule over what we do. And so if we adopt this policy tonight, then the way in which committee members outside of the board will get appointed will be based on the process that's laid out in the policy. Yes, Tanya?
I think when we met as a committee, we were trying to move between what does it look like to have the superintendent appoint a staff member as opposed to a staff volunteer. Right? And trying to have those be different. And so if you look under, let's see, if you go down to where it says volunteer community and staff members, appointments to the standing committee, that goes to, so the staff and the community would go through the same process. Just so we could be clear about that would be a staff member volunteering to be part of this that is interested as opposed to appointed by.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Question for policy committee, when you talked about staff volunteering and payment, right? So is it the expectation that it's an unpaid position, and is that clear enough in the policy for staff that are opting to participate?
I think, we.
Because the appointed thing I get, right? Like if you tell me, if you direct me to do it, then I expect to get paid for it. If I'm volunteering, but I'm still taking up time, sort of what does that look like from a staff compensation perspective, if at all, just so staff are clear?
Yeah, I think that's why we put it under volunteer, because it would be, they're not being appointed as part of their job. It would be something that was of interest and that they would be wanting to, just like all of the board work, be part of that. Knowing that also is going to require us as a committee to think about what are times that people are accessible. So by adding more people to those committees, thinking about when people are available to be able to do that work.
I would remove approval of policy P00155 as presented.
Second.
Great. Any further discussion?
Oh,
Oh, sorry, Janice, you look like you're about to say.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, just one thing. I was not able to be at the policy committee meeting because I had a medical appointment. So I still, I guess I'm just wondering if we would potentially could have 2 staff members as part of the committee. Or if there's a reason that, because it says 1 or 2 in there, and I wasn't there for the discussion, so I'm like wondering.
So it is 2 staff members, because it's the assistant superintendent is one staff member, and then it'd be somebody who volunteers as a staff member. So then that would be two non-board members and then two community members. So then we're at 4 non-board members versus 3.
Gotcha.
So it's a 7 group, which I think is a nice size.
Feels like a manageable number.
It feels like this. Oh, 8.
Yes. Tanya.
I think the other thing we talked about was, we're not really sure what we're going to get for volunteers that want to be part of this from a staff perspective. So, if we end up, we can always revisit the policy if we find out that we didn't get this right.
Okay.
It will be open to the public. 7 is when you start to get larger, it starts to get less manageable.
And if you're trying to find times to meet up, 7's.
I do like that the policy specifies the assistant superintendent is the contact with the committee. It's important for the board, in my mind, it's important for the board to develop working relationships with other administrators other than the superintendent. And I think we should do the same thing for TLE. But that's for future consideration.
Well, TLA did have that before. Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, I just would comment too that my expectation is this is new committee, and as we start work, part of what we'll be thinking about is the committee itself and how to enshrine that committee in such a way that future boards, future personalities, et cetera, do the work that needs to get done. And so I just want to make sure we're expecting to make recommendations about the policy that defines the committee itself, right? That there's a cycle there of us considering the committee and continuing to make this policy as solid as it can be.
Yeah, I agree.
But I think this is a good start.
Yeah, I agree. I also, in addition to what you noted, Peter, I appreciate the call out of treasurer being the chair of it. I think because our kind of board leadership seats are elected by this peer group, it gives the opportunity, as opposed to committees, which are chairs are traditionally appointed by the president. So it allows, I think, for an appropriate leadership checks and balance there too, where you have us as a peer group deciding who is an appropriate person to chair that committee as a group, because it's such an important committee. I did have one question, and that was I guess it was Thursday. We talked about the potential of having separate policies for our standing committees. I'm just curious if that came up in your discussion versus kind of merging them all into one. I don't have a point of view, but we did talk about it.
We didn't go there, I think, to the point of just trying to move rapidly into getting establishment of this. That is true. Some districts have a policy of how you develop a committee, and then there's separate policies for each committee, something we could talk about down the road. But I think in light of the current just wanting to expedite process to get things up and going.
Yeah. This is where we landed. Makes sense. Yes, Susan.
I think that's a really excellent thought. So if that moves kind of in the process that you're comfortable with, we could have that on the agenda for the next policy meeting.
Sure. I don't have a point of view or any real sense of urgency around it. I was just curious if that was part of the discussion, because we did talk about that last time, and so I didn't know if there was an intentional change of we wanted this separate and now we've put it into 0155.
Yes, we just put it in there and didn't try and make major changes to the policy, so it wouldn't generate too much distracted discussion.
Yeah.
And that we could just move forward on this particular committee.
Yeah, that makes
And
sense.
the other thing that that's, I think, anticipated to be part of this process that actually isn't written into the policy, but I want people to be aware of that, and that is reporting out. And Tanya has some great guidance and direction for that, including formats and things, thoughts about that, which I think will be helpful for that.
And I'll leave it up to you, Susan, as policy chair and the rest of your policy committee to discuss whether or not that's an important thing to have, but just putting it out.
Do you have any thoughts about, so one of the things that I was finding when I read this policy, and it may be somewhere else, not in committees, but in another statement somewhere, but that reporting out piece, which we really want to happen, isn't clear.
Yeah, let's table that for now,
Yeah, I-
and
I
then
totally
you and I can, let's you and I discuss that, because I agree with you, and I don't want to get us too far afield of the agenda item.
Yes, but I wanted, again, the community to be very clear that that would be coming back and being publicly reported out if you aren't able to observe the actual committee meeting.
Yeah, okay, yeah, let's chat about that. Okay, great. We have a motion and a second, yes? Any further discussion, or are we ready to vote? I'm gonna do the 3, 2, 1 countdown like Aaron did on Monday. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Ayes have it, motion carries. All right, that takes care of our action items for today. Moving down to discussion. Discussion item 1, policy revision, first reading.
Yes, so I squeezed this into policy committee because I had them. And so one of the things that the district has offered is have this policy where they shall offer supplementary insurance to students, families, for in addition to their regular insurance policy to cover extra things. So a couple reasons why I'd like to propose rescinding that. One, low utilization, then averaging about 1 student a year. It also has a lot of administrative load to it because we have to go out, find the carrier, put the website together, get all the information out there for it to be ready for somebody to want it. And the third thing would be there are alternative solutions out there that if families choose to do that, we could put some alternatives on the website, happy to put them out there if people are looking for those. But it seems to be something that isn't highly utilized, but because it says shall, it means that we need to put it out there every year. So it's just one of the things I think as I was onboarding that I found that just didn't seem to be utilized and good return on investment.
Can I get a motion, please?
There's no, this is up.
Oh, this is discussion.
Yeah, it's
Oh
first
my God, I
reading.
was so excited to make a motion. I do have a question, and that just is, for the one family that has engaged in this, have we notified them that this is?
They didn't sign back up. There
Okay.
was one student before, and so they're not currently
Or
enrolled.
currently at 0?
Yeah.
Great. Any other discussion? Great. Thank you, everyone, for keeping me honest on the agenda. All right, next up, the 2023-2024 Seclusion and Restraint Report by Krista Foster, also known as the meeting where Krista and I spent 25 minutes talking about seclusion and restraint.
Got it. Got it.
It's our annual conversation, Krista.
I know. I was looking for you to send me questions in advance. I'm excited to see what you got tonight.
I know, usually I do, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so thanks for the time. We, as you know, every year in September, we come to you with our seclusion and restraint data and report, and we report it out in the same way each year and provide just some reminders around safety and what we're doing to be proactive and reduce and or eliminate use of seclusion and restraint. But I think the important reminders are just that this is necessary when a student's behavior presents a clear and present and imminent risk to the physical safety of the student or to others. I asked Shelby to join me tonight because she is one of our nonviolent crisis intervention trainers and has a few program updates, I think, from that perspective of things we've tried to do a little bit differently and expand some of those options. But we do require that all schools have a team of staff members trained in the use of nonviolent crisis intervention at all times. And those are the only individuals that would be who are certified, who would be engaging in any physical restraint with individual students. So in administrative content, obviously, we're just talking about a small number of students. We want to be really cautious with confidentiality and being really thoughtful with how we talk about this. This is really important data and information to consider and be aware of as a group. And also, we're talking about individuals and a relatively small group of individuals who we want to be really thoughtful about their confidentiality and integrity and knowing that our school teams are working hard to support all of our learners all of the time. So again, you have the report. Our numbers, our overall numbers, a bit a bit higher than the past couple of years with 100 total incidents. Remember, we report them out as total incidents of seclusion and/or restraint. I did sort of proactively consider that you might ask for that breakdown. So a few themes I think we can share versus looking at the numbers. I think you'll see that as usual, the data are skewed very much toward the elementary age. Predominantly younger students. These are folks who are new to school, new to routines, more likely to pose an imminent risk to safety, most often their own safety, although it can be safety of others as well. And these are our younger learners who are getting that first chance to learn and demonstrate those regulation strategies that are so critical. Looking at that a little bit more specifically this year, so I was curious to take a look at that. 100 is our number, so all the numbers are nice and easy to look at percentages, but 84% of all incidents occurred in grades K2, 55%, so more than half are kindergarten students, new to school, new learners. That doesn't surprise me, but I think just looking at the overall, just kind of seeing it in black and white and understanding that, like, we know this, we live this is our experience, but this is where the students, what we really have to get to know and develop those comprehensive behavior intervention plans. When you look at the individuals involved and the teams and what the work has actually been over the course of the last year, those completion of those functional behavior assessments and behavior intervention plans, once developed and implemented, leads to reduction in incidences. I think I can share, it's about 26 incidents of restraint only, 25 of seclusion, both in 48 incidences. I think it's really important to acknowledge, as we do in training and working with teams, that seclusion also has an impact, and really they're held at the same level and the same accountability. So not to discount that as significant. And, the data, as is typical, does include a significant proportion of students with disabilities, and there are several individual cases within the data that at the time of the incident of seclusion and restraint were not a student with an identified disability. I would say this year as a trend, there is a higher percentage of students who ended up needing that specially designed instruction in conjunction with their behavioral support needs. So sometimes, in layman's terms, like, kids come in, they figure some things out, we get a plan in place and work through it in those early years. Some of the students involved in the numbers that you see in front of you do require ongoing specialized instruction and support, and just more comprehensive range of support through special education. I think the only other thing, we always look at the proportionality. That is an area of need for us. There is definitely some disproportionality in a relatively small group of students. We're talking about 23 students. But all 18 of those students are students of color. So that is certainly a concern on our end as well. I'll pause there. Shelby, do you want to share a little bit about just the training and?
A few reminders of how we kind of train staff. So we have 4 trainers in the district, including myself. And we do the training through CPI. Training is the nonviolent crisis. And we offer initial training, which is a little bit more of an intensive 2-day. That's for new staff or staff that have never been trained before. And then we also offer refresher courses. And we've switched that up this year a little bit because I felt it was really important to get school teams together to do the training, because in the past we had just dates over the summer that anyone could sign up at any point. So instead of doing that where you might have your crisis team there together, you may not. We switched it this year where I'm going to the buildings during either the August in-services or the next PD day in September to actually work specifically with those teams together. So that was a big shift that we made this year, hoping that we could, make some more impact and really start the year off on a good place with those teams working together. Once that round of refreshers are done in September on the 23rd, we'll have probably about 125 staff trained across the district.
It continues to be a high area of interest and commitment from our staff to this. That goes way beyond sort of the folks that we request or require to maintain that certification.
Which is, yeah, like those kind of required staff are our student services folks, our staff that serve students in special education, our administrators. That's kind of like the groups that we really want to focus in on. And then if others can take the training too, because 95, maybe even 90%, 98% of the training is that proactive, the de-escalation strategies, the trauma-informed, that's the bulk of the training. So it's good for anyone to take if they want. A few other pieces that we've done differently this summer and the beginning of the year for proactive pieces is we worked with every single building team to kind of just reset their behavior systems work and really ground themselves in like some around that safe, inclusive, equitable school environments. Really thinking about culture responsive practices, restorative justice, effective physical spaces so that we can have some de-escalation spaces around, implementation of SEL, all of that kind of rolled into one. So we did a lot of work over the summer with teams on that. And then myself and Emily Kinsler are kind of piloting. We went to a training, which is also a new training offered by CPI. It's called Reframing Behavior, and it's really for all staff. And so we've rolled that out in all the elementary buildings to start the year, all staff engaged in that work. It's really about like the brain science and the stress response and kind of co-regulating with students and things like that. So those are some of the proactive pieces that were in addition to anything else we've done in previous years.
Questions?
Can you reflect on what, I know it's a small number of students, and it makes it hard to draw conclusions, big picture conclusions, but there's a significant increase in the number of incidents. What do you draw from that? What do you think we should draw from that?
I think one piece that is separate from like staff and student, how they respond is, I think we're better at reporting. I do think that over the last 3 or 4 years, we have gotten better processes in place to actually report, like from the building to us. So I do think that's a piece of the puzzle, not probably, doesn't negate any of the other sort of things we need to think about, but I do think that is a piece.
What would a typical incident that gets reported look like?
It could be a range, right? So any sort of seclusion where you're sort of prevented from leaving a space that's not your peers, it could be, many of them that we get are your durations of minutes, right? Where like, oh, just need a little chance to reset, unsafe, not leaving this space. It can be where a student is physically harming themselves or other people and staff have to, like that incident of restraint. It's always tracked on the forms in terms of like minutes involved. Those are like how many minutes and whether it's a cycle. But one single incident could be, you need to be secluded and restrained. It could be very temporary. It could be an extended time. It's rarely an extended time of either seclusion or restraint. Sometimes the cycle of regulation takes quite an amount of time for a student to come back to be ready to be able to learn. But that's then the language as well, I think. So as much as necessary, as little as possible. And the trainers do a nice job of reiterating to staff who would have to be involved is like, you have to consider that all of the time. Like, is the student in a place where this is necessary? And for how long? And that's as soon as that safety issue has been resolved, even temporarily, the incident is done with seclusion or restraint.
Yes.
You mentioned behavior intervention plans, like once they're implemented, then that there's a reduction in incidents. So I'm wondering, is there, like, if you track through the school year, do you find that like at the beginning of the school year, there are more incidents, and as like students are in school longer and plans are put in place, like there might be less near the end of the school year?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I would have expected perhaps to see that. What you do see is for individual students, the cycle shortens, but other students hit points of dysregulation at different times. So actually, when you look month to month to month, like March was our like lowest month, and I guess we have a week off, but like that was not what I would have anticipated, right? And so it just sort of, it's not one student from September to June, absolutely not. You can see those reductions over time. But the point at which some students experience a level of crisis or have something come up is a bit periodic. So it's a bit steady across the board, not with individuals, but across the year it was more consistent than I maybe would have guessed.
Eric?
So the Taylor Prairie numbers for students without disabilities, and Winnequa too, but Taylor Prairie really high. My question is, of those 38 students in Taylor Prairie and the 10 in Winnequa, are there referrals happening for special education with that group of students? Is there an increase in referrals?
Yes, that's what I was mentioning earlier that
Yeah.
could clarify a little bit, is that this year with this particular data set, and again, remember, Winnequa and Taylor Prairie both have kindergarten, and that's where the vast majority
Sure.
of our incidents are occurring. Yes, I would say there was a more noticeable trend of students being referred for and qualifying for and needing specially designed instruction related to behavior with this particular cohort of students.
And then a follow-up to that, with those referrals, are we finding students that are open enrolled in that category? Because they open enroll and they're not special education, and we find that they really are.
I don't think that that's a conversation unique to seclusion. I guess I can't really comment
Yeah.
appropriately about this particular, about behavioral disability related needs. Yes, we have students enroll who are new to us, where needs are unknown at the time of entry. And that's, I think, when we think about our open enrollment challenges and families that may have not known of a need.
Yeah, sure.
Yes, that is a trend. I'm not sure it's necessarily unique to anything you'd see here.
Thank you.
And I think I would add to that, like, these numbers for the grade levels don't surprise me, and coming from a different system. We do have a group of kids that missed early childhood instruction or missed a lot of early childhood settings, where some of that real basic schoolmanship kind of being part of a small group, and some of those things didn't happen in the same way that older kids have. And so just seeing that taking longer to get to a point of just the regulation and being able to co-regulate in some of those
And
things.
that was my second, maybe answer to Peter's other question. Besides being better reporters, I do think that that missing instruction from COVID has a huge, ramifications.
Yes, and I would add that that's a known element, right? We know that we've had disruptive learning. We know that we have developmental challenges that have come up kind of through COVID, I guess. So my question would be, how are we proactively addressing that, knowing that that's the reality, right? So it's you already know that going in.
I think that's part of the summer work that's one.
For this current year.
Yeah, I think a lot of those changes were in response. And again, I think recognizing, yes, that is a trend. We're going to plan for that. We're still, again, the number of students that are maybe represented here is not reflective of regulation across. Yep, that's a focus across the board. I would say if you're asking for what do you notice as a trend, I think the intensity of the behavior, the continuum of behavior that's seen, and what not having good regulation skills looks like is a little bit different. And maybe the turnaround, I guess that I use the word intensity just because of the level of just time and effort and strategies that our teams are putting in to really problem solve and troubleshoot and work with students and families. And the good work is happening. It is taking a bit of time to get to a place of regulation. We're seeing some successes and some, I think that is something that occurs. It's,
Are we still involved in the Bridges program? At one point, we were at capacity in that program. Is there kind of, where are we in that today?
Sure. Yep. We have always met it's a limited program, if you'll remember, right? So it's 24 students per year. For our district, what I typically say, it's a really good fit for us because serving 24 families and students across the year is about right for our size. We have no trouble filling those spots, and sometimes it's a matter of timing of when needs occur. And certainly, yep, that's one team that we've tapped into to support our buildings and our school teams as one aspect of supporting behavior.
So I'm going to be honest, these numbers are disappointing and concerning, some of which is not new, right? So some of it, and I'll continue to reiterate this every time we get it, the idea that we would put hands on or seclude our youngest learners at this extent is problematic to me. It continues to be problematic to me. I struggle with this idea that kids' first school experiences coming out the gate are about grown-ups not letting them leave places and putting their hands on them. And so I will always hold the aspirational goal of seclusion and restraint to zero, but really especially for our youngest learners for whom like these experiences aren't neutral, right? I mean, they cause harm. The other thing that's concerning to me, and this feels different to me than in previous years when we've been talking about demographics, or maybe we just didn't get it, is that when you're talking about almost 80% of these students are youth of color, like that's a systemic equity problem. That's not a youth behavior problem. And that is very concerning to me in light of all the things that we talk about. And so I guess I'm curious. I've got two questions. One is the one I ask every year, which is, how is our debriefing process, right? How is our, like, what movement and changes have we made around that? But then the second is, like, how are we as a staff, how are you all as a staff, as a school community, like, really meaningfully unpacking the fact that the majority of students who are, in effect, getting, like, harmed by adults in our building are students of color. Like, that's really concerning to me, Krista. And I know you know it, and I know you feel it too. But and
I think the reminder is, twofold. So I think the actual work is supporting the building teams who are seeing behaviors that are unsafe and dangerous. And truly, I do feel very confident that our teams, and again, this is a list of students we're very familiar with, and that work is to support the teams and to do that work, that, like, what is going on, how are we handling it, how do we shorten that trajectory of, like, once is too many times. I think we agree with that. And then also the safety for the students and adults in the buildings, quite frankly, is the ongoing conversation. So I think everyone would like to see it as zero. There are 15 more, there's only 6 more students than last year. And again, in this context, there are students who had, like, one little, blip in September. I never was in a school before and did something completely unsafe as a 4 or 5-year-old. And then there are students, with some intensive needs that we have continually been problem solving with over time. And obviously the folks in the building every day can speak to that as well. And they're working very hard on that, because no one wants to see this happen at all. I would say that we're glad to see it, and we have none as of today, right? And a year ago we had 4 or 5 already, so that's great. We'll have to continue to pay attention to that. I think that focus of the staff is on safety for all involved and continues to be. And I will say, like, the participation rates in the training is reflective, the teams meeting more routinely and having those conversations together. I think I can speak for everyone who'd like to, no one wants to do this ever. We would like.
Oh, yeah, it's
those numbers
awful.
to
I've
be
done it
zero.
too. Like,
Yeah.
it's not good. Just really quick, Tanya, I think, and this is, I think, for you, because poor Krista gets stuck with this every year. This is her 4th year of this. I will say that I have always expressed, and I understand that this is how you report it to DPI, so I get that. I find the nature of this support really dissatisfying, because all it does is aggregate pieces and doesn't tell the story, I think, what you're trying to tell, and an important one, right? Which is, hey, we got it, we saw it, we addressed it. Now look how our planning and programming is working, and that is what this report never shows. And so it's not that I don't believe you, Krista, and I know your team is working hard, right? I know all of our staff is working hard, but I think as we move forward, being able to see that story in as a data story would be really helpful, because when you just look at it as like 100 unique instances, 23 kids, 45 of those are literally our youngest kids. Like it's very hard to see that story, even though I know and believe that it's working. Go ahead, Tanya.
Yeah, and I appreciate that this needs to be reported to the whole board, but this is one of those reports that should go to teaching, learning, and equity and be unpacked, and then, information
Yeah, that's
shared
great.
here. Because I think
No, I disagree. I think it should come to the board.
it would come teaching, learning, and equity first, and then to the full board.
Yeah, I'd like to see it though before it gets to a committee. I think it's important. I would like to. I mean, I'd like to see it, I don't know why it can't come directly to the board.
Hi, Peter.
I was going to say that, I mean, it's a bigger discussion. Putting it in the TLA committee for a bigger, longer discussion is an appropriate thing to do. When the timing related to when it comes to the board is, beside that.
Well, I'd like to see it come to the board.
I would say it was an and, not an instead of.
Go ahead, Susan.
Well, I think one of the things that's been very interesting is that it's kind of just that whole thought about what does this board want to know and want to see? And one of the things that Teaching, Learning, and Equity has been doing is identifying some of those things so that they could come forward. And the easiest way to see all of that is to be able to just zoom in on one of those meetings, or then, if it were taped, watch it taped, but we haven't been, it's just too much to tape everything right now. So, I guess that leads you up to just, if a individual board member does want to see that.
Susan, I don't need you. You don't have, I understand how things work, okay? I know, I don't know why you're going on about this. Like, I understand how
Eric
the
and
process
Suzanne.
work. No, I do.
Yeah, I know.
I don't need to hear how the process works. I get it.
Yeah, I
understand it.
understand. I hear you, Tanya, and I agree around longer conversations. I also agree with Eric, though, that whatever the data that comes out of that conversation needs to be presented full board. Yeah, Janice.
I would love, at a future meeting, because you mentioned there was new training for staff, I would love to hear from staff, maybe, and obviously I understand the whole confidentiality part, but later on in the year, how that training has impacted how they're able to interact with students, that would be really cool.
Yes, Rochelle.
I think that would be a benefit of talking about this in TLA, because then there could be additional people in part of the conversation. So it's not just the board and two representatives, but people boots on the ground every day, recognizing maybe where weaknesses are and strengths are. And so we can kind of then bring that to light as well.
I like that. Other questions? I appreciate you both. I recognize, like I said, that, it's a hard conversation to have. We have it every year.
I would rather put myself out of a job as an NBCI trainer.
Yeah, no, I know. And I will reiterate again, I know that you all are working incredibly hard. I know that your staff is working incredibly hard. I know everyone in there is due to do what's right by kids. And I'm really looking forward to what you're going to implement so that next year when we're looking at data again, it looks different. So thank you both.
Thank you.
Susan, is it a question around this?
It's a comment, and that is that one of the things that's been difficult in the past is that if a board member is asked for information, sometimes the directive is we need the board to want it, not just one person. And that's made it more difficult to get information. And now, as we're being confronted with the result of some of those issues, particularly looking at the budget process, again, I just would like to comment that I support Eric's request for that information to the board.
I appreciate that, Susan. All right, informational items. It's a new,
Yeah, so
it's a new agenda item.
As we were having agenda
FYI.
planning, thinking about, how board reports want to come forward, and thinking about what those information items are that committees met. So we had policy committee last week, or this week, but then we just talked about the policies, so another policy committee report seems redundant. So wondering, if people have reports from the committees or things that they attended that they wanted to share, that people wanted to hear about, that they could be discussed. I think the other thing we've talked about is, starting to have minutes from our committee meetings, and then those be able to be, located here also, so people could see what are those committees talking about, because, you can watch the live stream or come and watch them live, but there's not necessarily the recorded part.
Yeah, so with that being said, we have 3 informational items: personnel, MGEF, and the policy committee. And so I'm curious if Philip or Susan have any updates they want to share as informational items today.
Yeah, I can just give a really brief update on personnel activity. We are in the midst of bargaining. We had a bargaining meeting yesterday with the teaching unit, the teacher unit. There's some other dates on the calendar coming up for additional bargaining sessions. And we've also scheduled a meet and confer out in October. But really nothing else to report at this time, aside from the committee's in process with bargaining.
Great, thank you, Philip. Susan, did you have anything you wanted to share in terms of your?
Well, the Monona Grove Education Foundation, again, it's an expected report out because I'm the board liaison, the appointed board liaison for that committee. So the Monona Grove Education Foundation met on September 10th. They had a large discussion of funding requests for snacks, because that seems to be a major concern for funding in the MG schools right now. They approved $3,250 for snacks for MG schools. They did a discussion of building endowments, and I think it's really important that all the board members and all of administration understands that every single building has an endowment. And I think it's a minimum of 10,000, but that's kind of where it started. It earns interest every year, and the interest from that endowment is available to the building, and they often do not receive requests for that money. So they're trying to work on that communication being a little bit better, but I think also coming from the superintendent, that might be a helpful thing as well. They're doing their fundraising for their CARES campaign. The Grants and Awards Committee is working on grant requests. The Communication Committee is working on the foundation webpage, if you want to look at that and have any comments. And they plan to have some involvement with the high school homecoming to promote the foundation. Abby Eddington spoke about the Weekend Snack Pack Committee. This program is continuing to support students and is working on several fundraisers to support this program to help, because this seems to be an important need in the buildings at this time. They also had a large discussion about promoting the foundation and letting people be aware that it's there, what funding is available, and whether or not you have to make that application. So it was a really nice meeting. Yep.
Did you have anything additional you wanted to share about policy committee other than what we've discussed today?
No, usually we had to do the committee report first.
Yeah, that's why I
typed
got
it up and written it,
Yeah.
which is fine, but we just covered it and it took care of everything. No,
Great.
I'm done.
Perfect. All right. Superintendent's report.
Yeah, so just wanted to share some details. So as we said, we welcomed 3,694 students to the district last Tuesday. On September 20th is when we do our third Friday count, and I think we've talked about student enrollment being really a driver for our revenue. And so I'm hoping by at the first meeting in October to be able to talk about what did our third Friday count look like, and then also give an update of class sizes by grade level also, because I know that that's something important we want to continue to look at. The other thing that just wanted to report out on is we did get the update from, it's okay, Katie, don't worry. We did get the update on school nutrition from 23-24, and just wanted to share a couple, pieces of data. So 46% of our kids participate in school lunches. So that comes out to be 272,953 lunches served in a year. And then breakfasts, we also have 193,429 breakfasts that are served each day, or each year. So really thinking about, how are kids having access to food? I think as Susan alluded to, the MGEF has really been talking about food security and really making sure that, kids are able to start off their day and get through their day in a good way. So lots of positive feedback about the lunches was at the middle school today, and the kids were talking about that they liked it, they liked the foods, the chefs are doing some new things. So I think that's pretty important for us to continue to think about as we go. Also, we did start the budget webpage, which we had put together for visits. And the first 4 days of school, we had, 203 visits to that webpage. We have had over 110 people sign up for the emails to get notified of information outside of like when we send out all district. And so that's been, we've had a positive response to that. So thank you to the communications team for continuing updating that and getting that information out there as we go through that. Also wanted to give an update on feasibility of broadcasting from Cottage Grove. Katie and the team will have been in touch with the village. They're absolutely open to the concept. The person who does their technology only comes in on the day they have meetings. And so we have to get a hold of that person on that day and really think about what does the collaboration look like between the Village Hall, Monona Community Media, and then also the school district, because I think making sure that we have accessibility. So even when we moved out to the large space on Monday night, about 15 minutes of the feed went down. Now we record on backup equipment, so they were able to put the backup, but the live stream was out for 15 minutes, so people that were watching missed that part. Now, by the next morning, it was updated, so even when we leave this little space, because this is where everything's set up and where the new equipment was placed, it gets a little wonky. And so we just really want to make sure, to your point of thinking about that accessibility and making sure that it has a high level of success. So gathering more information, we'll keep bringing back what we have. And like I said, everybody wants to get to yes, just want to do it in a way that we make sure everything works. Seems like it should be simple, but there's lots of how does equipment work with other equipment? It's
never simple.
But we continue to work on that, and we'll have an update in October.
Questions for Tanya at all? Okay, thanks for looking into that. And then we have future meeting dates, personnel on the 10th, personnel on the 16th, TLE on the 17th, and then our regular Board of Ed meeting on October 9th at 7 o'clock. And we'll let you know if there will be a closed session. If so, it'll be at 6.
I'd like to note that September 10th is not in the future.
It is not. That is a past meeting date. Thank you very much.
Yeah, we're not going backwards. Not doing that day again.
That one happened already, but you can come to personnel on September 16th if you missed that one and you really want to engage. Thank you. All right, that is it for our agenda today. Can I get a motion to adjourn, please?
I move we adjourn.
I second that.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Ayes have it. Motion carried. Meeting is adjourned at 9:08 p.m. Thank you, everybody.
So what do you think?